Back in February of 1991, I sent a letter out to 7 individuals, 1 from California, 1 from Australia, 2 from Pennsylvania, 1 from New York, 1 from Texas, 1 from Missouri, and of course I at the time was living in North Carolina. I said, "Dear Dharma friend, I am sending this letter to the following individuals," and then I named them. I said, "Each of you has expressed positive interest in joining a Wider Shin Buddhist Fellowship. On the premise that we should, in such an organization, have opportunity for mutual correspondence, I am enclosing with this letter a mailing list with our addresses. I trust that no one will mind me sharing this information among ourselves or with those who may later make inquiry to learn more about our WSBF. I am sending a personal copy of this letter to Reverend Kenryu Tsuji, former Bishop of the Buddhist Churches of America, who has been demonstrably supportive of, quote, converts and isolated Shin Buddhists. I am also sending a copy to Dr. Alfred Bloom, a convert himself, who is in a position, as Dean of the Institute of Buddhist Studies, to be helpful to our cause." And then I went on to share some responses that I had gotten from these folks relative to a couple of questions that I had raised, such as possible activities or functions of our organization. Now, this organization went on for a while, but it kind of petered out. But I thought I would maybe share a few of the things that emerged from it back at the time. And this was before, common use of email and other kinds of electronic means of communication. Basically, we had the snail mail and, of course, telephone. But in any case, in this particular video, I want to highlight something from my Dharma friend Jim Davis, who was at the time living in Missouri, and wrote a piece called An Introduction to Shin Buddhism. This is what Jim shared with us. He said, "The purpose of this text is to provide a brief introduction to Shin Buddhism as it is understood today by some members of the Wider Shin Buddhist Fellowship." And he wrote this, by the way, in September, or at least that's when I received it with a letter in September of 91. So this was a few months after that initial sort of introduction and initiation of our group. He said, "What is Shin Buddhism? Shin Buddhism is the latest and fullest development of the Pure Land tradition of Mahayana Buddhism. It shares with all other Buddhist sects the goal of relieving the sufferings of all beings who are trapped in this world of birth and death. It shares with the Mahayana sects the aim of one's life, Buddhahood, to aspire to become Buddhas. Shin Buddhism is different from the other sects in that it teaches us that Buddhahood is a gift to us from Amida, the Buddha of infinite light and life, through the Butsu." Who was the founder of Shin Buddhism? Shin Buddhism was founded by Shinran, who made a collection and commentary upon the Pure Land scriptures. This text, called the Kyogai Shinsho, outlined the way to Buddhahood through the Nembutsu, and by doing so delineated the true path and founded the Shin sect. Shinran was born on May 21, 1173, near Kyoto, Japan. His parents died in his childhood, and he was sent to a Buddhist temple to become a monk at age 8. Spending 20 years practicing the paths of self-power to force his way into enlightenment, he came to the realization that by his own efforts enlightenment was impossible. Abandoning the temple at age 28, he met the monk Honen, who was propagating the other power path of Amida Buddha and birth in the Pure Land. Through abandoning all practices and responding to the awakening of faith only through Amida's vow that Amida would not become a Buddha if all who, with sincere mind, faith serene, desire birth in the Pure Land and recite its name just once, did not have birth there and achieve supreme enlightenment. Through that process, Shinran received assurance of birth as Amida's gift. Shinran then spent the rest of his life propagating this path of other power to the masses. Where did Shin originate? The teachings of Shin Buddhism ultimately derive from the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha, who lived in India over 2,500 years ago. This Buddha taught many teachings, but few understood them. Before his passing into nirvana, he taught the 3 Pure Land scriptures to enable all people, especially those unable to grasp high philosophical ideas, to enter nirvana. After his passing into nirvana, his followers spread the teachings into China and Japan. However, over time, the teachings began to degenerate into a state religion of the rich and powerful. The vast majority of the people were excluded from Buddhism. Furthermore, Japanese Buddhism became entangled with Shintoism and folk religion. It was into such a degenerate age reformers were bound to arise, and Shinran was one of these reformers, along with Dogen and Nichiren. How did Shin come to the West? Like all forms of Buddhism, Shin arrived through the activity of the Asian immigration to the West. The Japanese immigration to Hawaii and the West Coast gave rise to the first Buddhist temples in the West. The Buddhist Churches of America is the present organizational form of Shin Buddhism in the USA. What is the meaning of other power? In Buddhism, there are two groups in which the various practices are organized. The first are the paths of self-power, meditation, ritual, visualization, etc., in which one tries to force oneself into nirvana by one's own power. Yet for the most of us, these paths are impossible to follow. For us who are caught up in everyday life, these paths are poison. They are a great yoke, dragging us into hell. And yet there is still hope, and that is other power. Amida Buddha, out of compassion for us beings whose destiny is eternal suffering, took upon itself all the burdens of practice. Amida has performed all the practices long ago for us and has transferred all the merit from those practices to us. All we need to do is accept this gift of Amida through the awakening of faith. Who is Amida Buddha? Amida Buddha is the Buddha of infinite light and infinite life. There is no place in the universe where the light of Amida's compassion does not shine. Through eternal life, there will be no being in the universe which Amida will not have the opportunity to save. Amida Buddha is not a god. Amida saves beings from the sufferings of this world of birth and death. This world is uncreated and eternal. It is driven by the power of karma, the laws of cause and effect, and is ever in change. Amida Buddha is neither a he or a she, but since we humans must personalize our divine beings, we can refer to Amida as either gender. The Japanese traditionally address Amida as our father and mother. What is the vow? It is the promise made by Amida that all beings who say its name will be born in the Pure Land and achieve enlightenment. This is realized in the present moment through the awakening of faith, or Shinjin. What is the awakening of faith, or Shinjin? This is the one moment in which Amida's gift of the assurance of birth in the Pure Land is personally experienced. It is to be grasped by Amida's promise, never to be abandoned. It is the point of non-retrogression. One cannot fall back into a lower rebirth unless one does so voluntarily as an enlightening being. What does it mean to take birth in the Pure Land? All beings die, and all beings are reborn. Until the experience of awakening of faith, one takes birth and death in the realm of the 6 types of beings: hell beings, spirits, animals, humans, anti-gods, and gods. Life in any of these groups ends in death and rebirth. That is the meaning of this world of birth and death. The Pure Land is a place of birth for those whose faith has been awakened by Amida. By birth in this land, one becomes an enlightening being and returns to the world of birth and death in order to save the many beings. Another way of seeing birth is that we share in Amida's infinite light and life, and then go on to share it with others. How is Shin Buddhism practiced? Shinran taught that practice is actually no practice. In other Buddhist sects, one must practice precepts, ritual, meditation, etc., in order to achieve something. In Shin, the awakening of faith is something we do not do. Rather, it is something that is given to us. We respond by saying the Butsu, the name of Amida Buddha, once. Yet, when faith arises, one cannot keep it to oneself, and one says the Nembutsu out of deep gratitude. With an attitude of gratitude, one can then experience the many facets of Buddhist experience. Only the Nembutsu is the basic requirement, and then only once. We can do other Buddhist practices, but they have no bearing upon our birth in the Pure Land. However, since others come to Buddhism through these many practices, they still have value, and we can lead others to faith through them. Should I accept the Shin teachings on faith? No. Just because Shin Buddhism is a religion of faith in other power does not mean we must take the teachings without testing them in the context of our daily lives. Shakyamuni Buddha taught the Kalama people, who were confused about the conflicting claims of roaming religious teachers, to test all teachings first. That is, not to accept a teaching purely upon authority, tradition, logic, conformity, etc. Rather, one should only accept a teaching only after putting it into practice and realizing its truth. Many of those not born into Shin Buddhist faith come after trying other Buddhist practices and found them impossible to fulfill within the context of everyday life. Amida Buddha reaches out just to such people and accepts them just as they are, without preconditions. Thus, Shin Buddhism has become a welcoming home to many who otherwise would have to abandon any hope of ending suffering. To conclude, Shin Buddhism is based upon our awareness that by our own efforts, Buddhahood is impossible to realize in this lifetime. We are all too bound by the weight of beginningless greed, anger, and ignorance to this world of birth and death. For lives without number we have failed to see through the sufferings of birth and death. And yet, now, for the first time, Amida has reached out to us, and through the reality of the vow awakens within us faith. When this faith comes to us as Nembutsu, then our Buddhahood, right then and now, is assured. So then say, Namu Amida Butsu, and join with others on a life of faith. And Jim Davis ends his treatise by again repeating the name of Amida Buddha, Namu Amida Buddha.